I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are Velocities in Music. This is our podcast. Today, we want to do another artist deep dive. I love artist deep dives.
I do too.
I really do.
A lot of fun.
I think it's more fun than the album review, mainly because we get to talk more about the artist holistically.
Right.
And the impact, more about the impact, which is really, when you look back at, historically on artists and what they achieve, that's what I think is the most intriguing thing about music.
Sure.
And in running through a discography, which we'd like to do today.
Mm-hmm.
And the artist that we've selected to dive into is the Smiths.
The Smiths.
Very prolific in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
Guys came out with 4 records that we will go through and give you all of our opinions on.
Yeah.
But Tom, so let's back up a second. What genre are the Smiths in?
Ooh. Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think it's a good question to set the stage for this, and then give us some backstory. Who were the band members' names? Like, where did they come from, and how did they become a band?
Sure. Well, the Smiths was a Manchester band over in the UK, and as you mentioned, put out 4 albums in a very short span of time, over 4 years, 1984 through 1987. Also had a slew of singles. As far as their style and genre goes, I mean, you could call them kind of the epitomal 1980s alternative rock band.
Yeah.
I mean, alternative rock is such a catch-all phrase, though. I mean, what the hell does that even really mean, right? They definitely have some post-punk and punk influences.
Yeah.
But they also have a lot of influences harkening back to like 1950s and 60s pop, rockabilly, stuff like that. And they really took that all and packaged it together. Now, one thing I think is important to say about them is that, to me, in spirit and in attitude, they were very much a punk band. You wouldn't think so from just listening to them, but really every single thing they did was in retaliation to something.
I love that you said that, because I totally get a punk vibe when I listen to the Smiths. An interesting thing, I want to just throw this out there.
Sure.
Years ago, we reviewed The Queen is Dead.
2012.
In very early in 2012. Yep. And it was my first exposure to the Smiths. This is admittedly a band that I desperately needed more exposure to, and Tom, as a good friend that he is, has made sure that I've gotten that exposure.
Yeah.
But we have talked very little about the Smiths, and over the last couple weeks, we've caught ourselves, because Tom and I work together. We hang out outside of work a lot, and just as we're around each other, we'll start talking about the Smiths, because this, like, as we're preparing for these deep dives, we listen to a lot of music, right? And so Tom and I, just our natural propensity is just to talk about music,
right.
And so we'll start talking. We're like, no, we gotta stop.
We gotta stop ourselves.
So we actually have talked very little about the Smiths. So I'm actually quite curious. It's interesting to me that you bring up the punk aspect of their sound, because I think that's one of the most attractive things about them. The other thing that I thought really resonated with me is how they chose this band name.
Yeah.
They wanted to choose something as generic as possible, because they wanted the focus to not be on the band name, but to be on the music itself.
Right.
And what's funny, our last artist deep dive, if you haven't checked it out, please go check it out. It's on Joy Division. It's actually a good precursor to the Smiths.
It is.
Joy Division, we talked about how awesome of a band name, as they went from Warsaw, their original name, and then renamed themselves Joy Division, how perfect that was to fit their sound, and how it drew attention to their music, where the Smiths were specifically trying not to do that. They wanted it to be purely about the music, yet in over the years, their legendary status has created such an iconic brand around the Smiths.
Well, part of that too is because of Morrissey and Johnny Marr's, over the top personalities.
Absolutely.
and a lot of the a lot of the kind of divisive feuds that they've had going on over the years. But that, Jake, what you say about them picking their band name is exactly what I mean when I say they have that punk spirit. They did that very deliberately. All of their album artwork, their album and singles covers, they very specifically picked actors or artists from a lot of the time back in like the early 1900s or maybe through 1960s kind of pop culture, and had this kind of two-toned color scheme to them. And even that is all part of this entity that they were trying to create. They deliberately tried to stay out of the out of the camera's eye. They didn't want to be on their album covers. This is all part of it. And what they were trying to retaliate against is this celebrity culture and this the kind of like dance type of music that was becoming big
so
at the time.
prevalent.
Right.
So prevalent.
Exactly. They really, with their music, were trying to kick against that and harken back to a time where pop culture was something that actually they felt really mattered. And to me, well, yeah, maybe they're not always kicking against government or singing about anarchy like punk bands sometimes are apt to do, but in spirit, that is totally who they were.
So Tom, give me a rundown of the
Sure.
lineup that make up the Smiths. Who are these guys, and what instruments did they play?
Sure. Well, at the front, you got Morrissey, who's the vocalist, just goes by Morrissey. His full name is Stephen Patrick Morrissey.
Patrick.
He just goes by
That's
Morrissey.
pretentious. Let's just go by one name.
Right, let's
Morrissey.
just go by Morrissey.
Man, that totally plays into the whole sound, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's just totally fits.
On the guitars, Johnny Marr, Andy Rourke on the bass, and then Mike Joyce on the drums. Once again, pretty classic lineup, and very nimble instrumentalists, I will say. And the interplay between Morrissey's vocals and the rest of the instruments, I think, is just really what makes them. I don't think that Johnny and Andy and Mike's parts in the band can be underplayed, but at the same time, I think we have to admit that Morrissey's vocals are front and center for the most part. I mean, they are the Smiths brand when it comes to it. They're what sets them apart, and it's not just his unique operatic, flamboyant voice. It's also very prevalent in the songwriting. It's
in the lyrics,
right? The lyrics. Oh my God, he's such a good lyricist. You know, we talked about Modest Mouse, and I mentioned that Isaac Brock is my favorite lyricist, and I'm sorry, Morrissey is right up there.
Yeah,
his lyrics are incredible, and they're once again kind of biting at times, but also very coy, very deep. And he sings about a lot of different kinds of topics. And this comes back also to them kind of trying to represent the everyman, to bring light to this kind of middle class, what's seen as like normal part of culture, and talking about what they're going through. And there's a lot of themes of love or romance, whether it be unrequited or even just kind of mysterious. There's been a lot of contemplation or people talking about Morrissey's sexual orientation, and there are a lot of songs that have this kind of ambiguous sexual nature to them and a lot of tension within that. But he does a great job of not making it explicit enough of what it's actually about. You can really interpret it in several different ways as people have, but also just capturing British culture of the time, but kind of comparing it, kind of juxtaposing it with the culture of the earlier in the 1900s.
So in 1984, the Smiths released their first album. It's called The Smiths.
Yep.
Which, after that, that lead up of why they chose their band name and the whole style that they were going for, makes a lot of sense. Like we're just gonna make this as vanilla as absolutely possible. So the Smiths' first record. When you listen to this record, Tom, what are some of the main like I think that this record serves as the fundamental thesis statement or the foundation of the Smiths and their sound and their style. And the Smiths' music is horribly unique. There really isn't a lot of stuff out there that sounds like this, nor could it because of Morrissey's vocals, right? There's only one Morrissey. And I would say that without Morrissey's vocals, the Smiths may have not ever found success. As great as a guitarist as Johnny Marr is and the other members of the band are, I feel like that wouldn't be enough to really get this, to get people to catch on to their music and what they're doing. Morrissey adds so much intrigue in just the way that he constructs vocal parts and his lyrics, as you were talking about earlier, Tom, that it's infectious.
And this is clear right from the get-go on their self-titled debut.
Exactly.
And that's really what I feel like their debut is all about, is establishing that sound and that songwriting style. Because what Morrissey is a master of, and the other musicians as well, is crafting these songs that, Jake, I know that you're big about song structure. These guys mastered it.
Absolutely.
They are able to make catchy songs that don't rely on choruses that often you couldn't even identify necessarily what a chorus is.
Yeah. I feel like every vocal melody that Morrissey comes up with is a chorus,
right?
And that is really talented, right? They're so just almost the rhythm at which he delivers his vocal melodies. They're melodic, but the rhythm of his delivery gets you caught onto the song, and that's like what you're following. And a lot of times it's in stark contrast to just the fast-paced bass and drums, and then Johnny Marr's just like clangy guitar thrashes that he does at times, and the album starts off with Reel Around the Fountain, which is nearly 6 minutes long. What an epic way just to open up the Smiths' discography, right? You really get a good sense of who the band is right there. It is all about the rhythm of the bass and the drums, the guitar adding that layer of intensity on top of it. But Johnny Marr's guitar is often, and this is really kind of throughout at least their first couple albums, the self-titled and Meat is Murder, oftentimes kind of buried in the mix. Yeah. And then Morrissey's just vocals sitting on top of that, creating this ambiance and the atmosphere that is the Smiths, and it's kind of a cold feeling. It's great for fall and winter. That's just why I think it's we're getting into the heavy fall season here, so it's certainly fun to listen to them this time of year because of the moods they create in their sound.
Right. And the way that they achieve that, they're just doing so many things in the songwriting that to me are just objectively brilliant. Yeah. I mean, if you don't like the Smiths, I feel like, if you just don't like this genre, if you don't like rock music, or if you don't like Morrissey's voice, which I could understand, I personally love it, but it's not necessarily for everyone. Yeah. But if you like rock music and like Morrissey's voice,
like songwriting,
then I feel like you have to like the Smiths.
And like intriguing lyrics.
Right. I because I just think that objectively, they're one of the best bands ever.
I will say that I think that they are a little bit inaccessible at first. I at least had trouble really grasping.
They're tough to crack, yeah.
But they're one of the most rewarding bands to listen to, I think, because at least the experience that I had, particularly with this first album, The Smiths, the more that I listened to it, the more that I realized the genius driving it. And that is what got me addicted. It's what got me hooked and made me want to, I just don't want to listen to anything else besides the Smiths because it's so unique and what it offers is so potent that I really don't want to listen to anything else. I could just listen to all 4 of the Smiths records just on repeat.
Right, yeah, and you don't get sick of them. Yeah. So I want to jump back real quick to the debut and some of the things that they're doing on here that to me just set up their career perfectly and set up their sound and their discography. One thing that Morrissey is a master at, I mentioned song structure, and he does these subtle things with repetition that make it so the ideas in the songs do not get stale. If you do have a chorus that's being repeated, maybe he'll, in his vocal phrasing, he'll sing it a little bit differently. Or what he does all the time is with analogous parts of a song, if he repeats something later, maybe he'll switch up just a couple of the lyrics. And he does this all the time. He also, what they'll do with the song structures is make it so not the same parts lead into the same other parts. You see this on their debut right away with You've Got Everything Now, Still Ill. Those 2 tracks really exemplify that for me. This Charming Man, once again. The verses, he kind of takes the last half of the first verse, puts it at the beginning of the second verse, and then just does some la-la-las for the rest of the second verse. Right. I mean, little things like that they leave such a mark. And the thing is, who's writing songs like that today? Right. Like no one. Right. It's such subtle nuances, just these little tricks, these little songwriting and song crafting tricks that to me are just brilliant, and they define the Smiths' work.
And the lyrics are biting, even from the first record. That is a huge part of the Smiths' music, and they set the stage on this first record by doing that. Just reading the track titles on this record, you can tell how biting the lyrics are and the themes that they were presenting, like Pretty Girls Make Graves, track 4 on this, the last track, Suffer Little Children. I mean, like just the evocativeness of those song titles and the lyrics within them. They grasp you.
And those two are good highlights, because Suffer Little Children is about, a series of murders that occurred in the area. Pretty Girls Make Graves. God, you read the lyrics to that song and about, there's certainly plenty of songs about the pressure, sexual pressure coming from a man to a woman, and then kind of reversing that.
I'm not the man you think I am. I'm sorrow's nature's son. He will not rise for anyone. I'm pretty girls make graves.
Oh man, like it's some pretty harrowing stuff. But I will say about the debut, I'm just going to dive right into it here. I come back to it more for individual tracks than I do the full album.
Sure.
I absolutely love Reel Around the Fountain, You've Got Everything Now, Still Ill, This Charming Man, even like What Difference Does It Make is a really great track. But there are tracks that I feel are skippable. In particular, I absolutely do not like the song Miserable Lie. I don't like it at all. It's the only place in the Smiths' discography where Morrissey's vocals actually bother me.
You'd much prefer Terrible Lie.
By 9 Inch Nails, sure. Yeah, I'll dive into that one. But that's why, and like The Hand That Rocks the Cradle's okay. Pretty Girls Make Graves to me is okay.
A little bit of track displacement.
Right,
kinda sets
right.
it back.
And like while
I
Suffer
can
Little
see that.
Children, the lyrics are haunting, they're mesmerizing. I don't feel like the performance is really there. It's a longer track.
And is it a great closer for the album?
Right, exactly. To me, it's not quite as memorable. Right. So there are a lot of really strong tracks that I come back to here, but I just feel like at this point in their career, they were mastering their songwriting style and establishing a sound, but that it wasn't quite perfected yet.
I think that the biggest achievement that this record did was just put them on the map.
Right,
To add to that foundational layer, right? There are a lot of people out there, though, that think this is probably the second best. I think it's pretty much undisputed that their third album, The Queen Is Dead, is the quintessential Smiths record.
Right.
But I do feel like this one gets a lot of credit for establishing that Smiths sound, but that doesn't necessarily make it like our favorite record.
Right.
I know that the things that we look for generally lead us to different conclusions.
Sure. And what's interesting too is, they had already gained some attention from singles that they had put out, like Hand in Glove from the debut as well. And then that led to Hatful of Hollow being released later in the same year, 1984, their first kind of compilation, which I think is funny. They put out a compilation album the same year as their debut. That's how prolific these guys were. Because on top of their studio albums, those 4 main albums, they had so many singles and B-sides, and they're one of those rare bands where their singles and B-sides are some of their best tracks. I mean, really offhand, the only other example of that I can think of is the Beatles. The Beatles had a bunch of tracks that were then later compiled into Past Masters
Modest
Volume
Mouse.
2. Yeah.
Who take a ton of influence from
the Smiths.
From the Smiths.
Absolutely. And
including their guitarist on one of their albums.
right. A little bit there too. But Hatful of Hollow, admittedly, I'm not big on. I think the one real highlight is it's got How Soon Is Now.
Right.
Which is funny. It's easily one of the best Smiths songs, I think. But it's also the Smiths song that doesn't really sound like any other Smiths song. It's, this kind of like
that's
7 minute.
A unique trait.
Right. This kind of 7 minute like hypnotic looping guitar thing. Hatful of Hollow has a lot of tracks, live tracks from the live performances from the John Peel sessions, and personally, I just don't see a whole lot of value in that one, considering there's overlap between it and Louder Than Bombs, which is a compilation we'll get more to later. That one came out in 1987, so we're not quite there yet. But really, to me, Hatful of Hollow, the only reason I would want it is because
you're a Smiths fan,
How Soon
right?
Is Now,
Yeah,
right? And I love the band, but How Soon Is Now then became its own single later on. It was also featured on the American release of Meat Is Murder, which is kind of where we're moving to next. But did you have any other thoughts to wrap up 1984?
It's funny because it really is every single year.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's 4 years in a row. Come in and just knock out 4 incredible albums, and then the band breaks up.
Yep.
So 1985 is the year of Meat is Murder.
Yep.
Their second record. I think you see the band kind of embracing more controversial subject matters.
Yes.
The album title and the closing track on the album is really a very confrontational subject where it's
definitely
Morrissey is a vegetarian. Even I don't know if he's a vegan.
I
Is he
don't think
vegetarian?
he's a vegan.
Just vegetarian.
Yeah.
So
Might be wrong.
it's a statement. He's saying like
Yeah.
if you eat meat, it's murder, right?
And he puts together about as logical an argument as you can make.
Yeah, I mean,
for
you
that.
listen to the lyrics, and the lyrics kind of play as an argument.
Yeah.
For that line of thinking, and yeah, he does a pretty good job. Like it honestly, if you're really listening, it makes you kind of wonder. Oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't have this gigantic T-bone steak.
Right.
Beautiful creature must die. This beautiful creature must die. A death for no reason, and death for no reason is murder.
Now I'm really hungry. It is lunchtime, Tom.
Right. With Meat is Murder, I love this record. And I want to put out there right away, too, that when I'm talking about Meat is Murder, I'm talking about the original UK release that does not have How Soon Is Now thrown into the middle of it. How Soon Is Now is one of the most brilliant songs I've ever heard. I will come out and say that. And I almost feel like it's unfair to just throw it in. Because you could take some of the best albums of all time, and if you just took How Soon Is Now and threw it on there, it would make it a better album. It's almost unfair when it comes down to it. But it also kind of interrupts the flow of the album. In the U.S. release, but still, like, man, when it comes to my record collection, I would love to have a original U.S. release of this album just so I can have How Soon Is Now with it. But that aside, the thing I love about Meat is Murder, 2 big things. First, I think it's Andy Rourke's best album.
Okay.
The bass shines
The bass
throughout this
is
album.
crazy on this record.
Especially the first couple tracks, Headmaster
Yep.
Ritual and Rush Home Ruffians.
Yep.
Later, Barbarism Begins at Home. That bass line just murders through the whole 7 minutes of that track. It is incredible. I just feel like the bass is highlighted, and along with that is the second reason I really love this album, and that's that I think it's their most even and balanced album. I will actually come out and say it now. I like Queen is Dead better, but Meat is Murder is a very close second for me, and that's because it feels so even.
Cohesive, flows very well.
Right, within the tracks and between them. So what I mean by that is I feel like this is the one album that Morrissey absolutely doesn't dominate.
Yes.
He takes a step back, and where he shines, he's still brilliant.
Yes.
But there are so many more places where the bass guitar and drums are highlighted.
I totally
like,
agree with
like
that.
the end of
It's balanced. Everything's balanced here.
Right. The end of That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. That end jam on Barbarism Begins at Home. One song I want to highlight is Rush Home Ruffians, which I think is really cool because first off, the bass line's just great. You've got this kind of rockabilly guitar part. But it's the same thing over and over again. That actually is a Morrissey highlight to me because he creates the entire structure of the song.
Right.
Because the guitar and bass and drums are doing the same thing for the entire duration. And so any kind of structure that it gets is just from where Morrissey decides to repeat certain phrases.
The last night of the fair, by the big wheel generator, a boy is stopped and his money is grabbed, and the air hangs heavy like a golden wine.
But I also just feel like it's got the smoothest variety of sounds on
Yeah,
it.
it totally does. It totally does. I think that the Headmaster Ritual kind of, if anything, I think that this album gets a little bit like it's so much more biting and political. And the Headmaster Ritual, it's about corporal punishment.
Yeah.
And just generally in opposition to corporal punishment. Like I think that sort of confrontation in the lyrics makes this even edgier than what it would have been had they not done that. Right.
He kicks the album off with the line "Belligerent ghouls run Manchester schools."
Right.
Like
it's very biting.
Yeah.
It's almost an affront to your senses when you listen to it.
It's an indictment.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that that's what makes this album so endearing. This is my second favorite Smiths record, but only because the Queen is Dead, I think, is the masterpiece, right? And I think that we need to just jump right into that.
Right. Meat is Murder, one last thing I want to say about that is just that along those lines, and I think this plays into The Queen is Dead very strongly, is while it is very even, I think for that reason, for me, it doesn't have quite as many highlights. When I think of my favorite Smiths tracks, I tend to think more of The Queen is Dead and they're self-titled, actually. It's just that, to me, Meat is Murder has no skippable tracks.
Yeah, you have to listen to it as an entire record, which is something that both you and I love and treasure in an album. It is all around just a great record. Probably, I would say, legendary status.
Yeah.
Now, the true masterpiece Smiths album is The Queen is Dead. It pretty much undisputed. It's their third album, came out in 1986. It's like, how would you describe the difference in sound on this record? Because if we just spent all this time talking about how Meat is Murder is this balanced, very fluid, cohesive record that really works as an album, and then you come to the Queen is Dead. What makes it so much more special? Because to me, like, it's a noticeable difference,
right? And I would compare it to an album that would actually come out a few years later, Pixies' Doolittle. Not that they necessarily sound alike, but here's what I think both of these albums accomplish that make them so legendary, is that they're able to take a sound, several different styles, really, and establish them into a unified sound. And how they accomplish that is beyond me. It is pure genius. And that's why I compare it to Doolittle, because you listen to Doolittle and they're going all over the place, from surf rock to punk rock to kind of country twang.
The smorgasbord.
Right. And yet somehow it all feels like the Pixies. That's what the Smiths accomplish on Queen is Dead.
Right. They get a lot more progressive in their songwriting, a lot more sprawling, and they're going to different trying out different styles. The other thing is that the production changes.
Yeah.
The production is much more expansive, and they're even adding, there's flute on this record, there's strings on this record. I mean, it's much more expansive.
Right. I mean, you go from the upbeat kind of romp of Frankly Mr. Shankly, which is kind of sarcastic and kind of fun.
Yeah. It's funny.
Right. You go from that to this like smoky, depressing lounge sound of I Know It's Over, which is one of the most chilling and amazing songs I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
Still I cling. I don't know where else I can go. I know it's over, and it never really began.
And you put those two next to each other on the album, and somehow from the presentation and the production, it unifies it.
Yeah.
And that's something they accomplish on this record that blows my mind. And I don't know how they did it, but they did.
I think another thing that they really achieved on this record, first of all, I think that they kind of started walking away purposefully from the punk roots that were more prevalent on Self-Titled and Meat is Murder. And on this record, they're much more so embracing kind of pop hooks, pop structures, while they're not going to the pure A-B structure that you guys know, at least I hate and Tom somewhat hates so much when it's used for evil and not good. But I think that the main thing that this album really takes to the next level is they add emotional warmth. Whereas the Smiths and Meat is Murder, lyrically, it's almost like it's almost abrasive, right? When you feel that abrasion as a listener, it's hard to emotionally connect to the record. You can appreciate it. You can be like, wow, this is super, angsty and it makes me think, and I love that. But at the same time, like, if it's not connecting to your emotions, like at this like subconscious level, it's a different experience, right? And I feel like The Queen is Dead accomplishes this, and I think the track that does it is Cemetery Gates.
Yeah.
I dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yates are on your side. I dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yates are on your side. Wild is on mine.
And I mean, if you can listen to Cemetery Gates and not just feel like overwhelming positivity, in a sense of purpose, I don't know. It just it gets to my bones, when I hear that song.
That song not only is my favorite Smith song, it is my second favorite song of all time, ever, all time. And I sometimes argue with myself of whether it is my favorite. My favorite song being Metallica's Master of Puppets, both of which came out in 1986. One of the many reasons that year is awesome. But I just don't think any song could ever impact me as much as Master of Puppets has. But Symmetry Gates is right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the only songs I literally can sit and listen to 10 times in a row on repeat.
Yeah.
And I have done that. And I don't get sick of it.
Yeah,
it
I can just listen to it over and over again.
Right.
Why do you think that is? Like, what are they doing in that song that makes that happen? Or is it just something magical that they just...
I think it is just that magical combination of songwriting and performance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the way the song is structured, Morrissey's lyrics, his delivery of them, the highs and lows and the dynamics, how he kind of comes down and whispers at the low points almost when the instruments come down also, and then they build it back up. Like, it's so optimistic, but not in a sugary, fake way.
Yeah, not in an untruthful manner.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
One thing, to me, every single instrument, besides the drums, obviously, is presenting a just truckload of melody.
Mm-hmm.
The bass line in that, like, I can clearly hear that bass line in my head, and like I just get goosebumps because it conveys that same level of emotion. The guitar, that kind of high strumming of the guitar that you hear throughout the song, really just like it just creates this austere to the sound, and then Morrissey's vocals. I mean, I think it's some of his best vocals and his best vocal performance throughout the Smiths discography, just within that one song. And you see other traits like that pop up throughout the record, but it's most prevalent on that song. And that having that song as the centerpiece of the record, it's like split. It's like right in the exact center of the record. It really is the anchor of the whole album.
And that song is a great example of something in general about Morrissey that I forgot to mention earlier that I think helps make him great, is that he's not just inspired by other musicians. He's much more inspired by playwrights and literature in general, poets, people from the days of yore who wrote meaningful things that weren't actually music related. He honors a lot of them on the album and single artworks. He references them in his lyrics, and I think that's something that really makes him stand out. And that's, a highlight of Symmetry Gates for me too, is the references to Keats and Yeats and Oscar Wilde, and to me the scene that he sets with those references and those allusions is much more potent than just trying to convey his general idea any other way. But that's another thing too that he's great at is having some songs that seem lighthearted at first, but you dig into and has such a deeper meaning. I mean, you could even say the same thing about the closing track. Some girls are bigger than others, which at first just kind of seems silly.
Some girls' mothers are bigger than other girls' mothers.
But really, like, you could dig into the lyrics, what few lyrics there are in that song that aren't just some girls are bigger than others, and you could read into them. You could do the same thing with a single of theirs, Shoplifters of the World Unite.
Right.
Is another great song that seems kind of silly at first, but then you think about what the lyrics mean, and there's so much more there. But that's what's great about Morrissey is he takes those and he delivers them in such a way that it's more accessible that way. It's not as heavy, but if you choose to dig into that, you absolutely can.
And outside of the first track, The Queen is Dead, on The Queen is Dead, most of these tracks are well, I guess I Know It's Over is also a pretty long track at upwards of 6 minutes, give or take a few. The rest of the tracks are all in that 3 to 4 minute range.
Yeah.
They all kind of feel like a compilation of singles.
Sure.
Whereas Meat is Murder was that perfect album format. The tracks had to rely on each other. These certainly play off of each other and capitalize on one another, as you were saying earlier with Frankly Mr. Shankly moving into I Know It's Over and the effect that gives. But the back half of this record really does feel more like a compilation to me. Tracks like The Boy with a Thorn in His Side. There's
like
a light.
in a tutu.
Yeah, there's a light that never goes out, and then Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others. The closing track, I've always said that, like, I've been kind of hard on compilations over the years, and you know, but I've always said that if it's a compilation of like really good songs, then it's just naturally good, right? You can't get over the fact that, and I feel like that's kind of what The Queen is Dead is, and it hit that right balance of variety, of just amazing songwriting, of you know, I don't think it pegged itself into any one corner. It didn't have any flaws. This is a legendary record. It's I think a perfect record. If we were scoring this again, I don't remember what we gave it years ago.
I think I gave it in like the low to mid 90s, but it's absolutely gone to perfection.
You know,
in my
like
eyes.
you know, like we're not, you know, on the podcast we really don't want to score. We're not going to give albums that we talk about scores, but we really think that this is. I think this is a perfect record.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
And we get those so very infrequently, even as you go through history and you know dig through a band's discographies, it's so very infrequent that you find a gem like The Queen is Dead. So if you haven't listened to this record, this is when you just stop listening to us, go listen to the record. It's more important that you hear the record than listen to us talk about it. So moving on to the next year of Smith's release, and their fourth and final record, full-length record, is Strangeways, Here We Come, which came out in 1987.
And actually kind of as the band were breaking up.
As the band were breaking up, that's right. And it's kind of a strange way for them, isn't it?
It is.
But it's, to me, first of all, let's get a bias out of the way. Okay. Tom, what do you think about this record?
I'm not big on it.
You're not big on it.
Easily my least favorite Smiths record, and I have some very key reasons for that.
I think I like this record a little bit more than you, mainly because I just love The Queen is Dead so much. And this record, it's very clear that they were trying to recreate The Queen is Dead in every way that they possibly can. And also, I think that you see some more expansive arrangements on this record.
Yeah, they're trying to evolve some aspects of it.
And like Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me. But I really feel like they fell short on a couple of places here. Like some of the songs just naturally are better than others.
Yeah. Some songs are better than others.
Exactly. And that displacement, the duds on this record are so stark in contrast for how they just don't accomplish what some of the more successful songs on this record do accomplish. But the other thing is that even the good songs aren't the Smiths' best songs.
Right. I completely agree with that. I have two big problems with Strangeways. First off, let's get this out of the way. It's still a good record. I think by any other band standards, it would be fantastic. It would be a huge success. But for the Smiths, coming off of the trio of albums that they had done, I find it to be a bit of a disappointment. And here's specifically why. First off, I'm not big on the production. They add a lot of other instrumental glosses.
It's as full of production as the Smiths ever had.
Right. You have the kind of dramatic string accents on Girlfriend in a Coma. You have the horns on I Started Something I Couldn't Finish. To me, they seem a bit over the top, and to me, they actually kind of undermine the whole message of simplicity that the Smiths were originally going for.
Yeah, they're getting off message on this record.
Right. Like it feels like the Smiths songwriting is still there, but they're presenting it like Huey Lewis in the News or something. I mean, that's an extreme comparison, but you get
horns in particular, right?
You get this fanfare in there that just feels kind of like is this really them? Here's the other big thing that I don't like about Strangeways. So we've talked a lot through their first few albums of, you know, some highlights both vocally and instrumentally, right? To me, Morrissey shines on Strangeways, but name me one track that has a standout bass line or guitar line.
Right.
I can't think of any.
Yeah. And the balance that they achieved early on.
Right. It's just, it's not there.
It was completely sacrificed to highlight more of Morrissey. And that's not really fair. I mean, you know, a lot of, you know, and I will say that our kind of joint opinion here is in stark contrast. I don't think mine is like I as severely discount this record as much as you do from the sounds of it. Like when I listen to this record, I still enjoy it. Particularly, you know, the horns that you were talking about there. Don't don't bother me nearly as much, but just the fact that I can't put this record on and have a fluid listen start to finish, I mean, that's a huge ding to this record, because I do feel like even on the debut record, you could do that still. This record, it's far more severe track displacement, and I feel like that really hurts the album listening experience. So as far as what they accomplished as an album, I don't feel like this record is particularly up to snuff, which is in contrast to what most of the music media seems to think about this band. They seem to think that this is one of the premier Morrissey and Marr songwriting performances, and yes, their songwriting was more expansive. That doesn't mean it's the better record,
right?
And so I think that our opinion is kind of in contrast to a lot of public opinion out there about the Smiths' discography. If anyone was going to discount a record, usually it's Meat Is Murder that gets discounted, and I think that's horse poopy, and that's not really fair because Meat Is Murder, as we've said, has that albumization to it that really a lot of the other records didn't focus on nearly as much, and particularly Strangeways Here We Come.
It's interesting, though. Meat Is Murder was their only number 1 record. Queen is Dead and Strangeways both hit number 2, but not number 1.
That's actually quite interesting.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it depends, too, on what was in competition with it at the time.
Right.
But I think that's an interesting point. So, yeah, Strangeways, I like. It's still a good record, but every time I'm listening to it, I just think, why wouldn't I just put Queen is Dead on instead?
Yeah.
Also in 1987, they put out a couple compilations, If the World Won't Listen, and then Louder Than Bombs. Louder Than Bombs is kind of the American counterpart to If the World Won't Listen, which once again compiles a lot of the singles and B-sides that they had put out over the years. Somehow Hand in Glove seems to come up on like all of these compilations. I don't think it's on If the World Won't Listen, but if it's on Hatful of Hollow, it's on Louder Than Bombs. And honestly, man, Louder Than Bombs, I love. I mean, it's a true compilation album. It was not written as an album. But what I love about it is that it, compared to their other compilations, it doesn't have as much repeats of songs that I can already get.
And there's some great tracks on it.
Or Queen is Dead. Yeah. Oh man, like Ask and Panic are fantastic songs. Half a Person.
Ask me, because if it's not love, then it's the bomb, the bomb, the bomb, the bomb, the bomb, the bomb, the bomb that will bring us together.
There are so many songs on there that are just straight hits. Just and they're one-offs. I can see why they wouldn't have maybe played well into an album like Meat Is Murder or The Queen Is Dead, but Louder Than Bombs for me is just right up there. It's one that I come back to a lot. They also have a live album that came out in 1988, Rank, which is from a performance in 1986. So a lot of stuff from Queen is Dead and Meat Is Murder on that, and I, that actually gets discounted a lot. It's gotten a lot of poor reviews. I think it's a decent live album. It's not fantastic, but it shows kind of another side of them. So all definitely worth checking out, I'd say. But I would put some emphasis on Louder Than Bombs as being a stellar compilation album.
So right at 1987, when Strangeways Here We Come was released, the band was starting to go through some turmoil.
Yeah.
Morrissey and Marr, the two prime, these guys are credited with I think most, if not all, of the songwriting of the Smiths put out. But the relationship there was becoming strained. Johnny Marr was performing with a lot of other bands, and I think that bothered Morrissey. Mm-hmm. I think he wanted it to be just the Smiths. We are the Smiths, and I think that the Smiths had kind of become what they set out to kind of protest musically, and Morrissey was kind of lost in that confusion.
He wanted to keep it going, but I think Johnny, first off, he was tired from the rigorous recording and touring
4
schedule.
Years, tours. I mean, that's
tons of
crazy.
Singles. It's nuts. But also, I don't think he liked the direction that Morrissey wanted to take the band in. Right. Morrissey was very focused on these kind of starting to get more and more focused on these throwback kind of pop sounds, doing covers of older artists, and Johnny's like, that's not what I started a band to do, Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a lot of bad blood there. I mean, the Smiths, they all pretty much hate each other. There was a lot of legal disputes over royalties, over songwriting rights, and it's just a mess. I mean, it ended, I feel like, about as badly as it could have, mm-hmm. without anyone being murdered.
Right. And they flirted with, over the years, there's been rumors that the Smiths might get back together, but in all reality, it probably will never happen, right?
Yeah, I'm not hopeful.
Yeah, they're not going to... It's highly unlikely that these guys are going to get back together. If they did ever like do a concert together, I'm sure it would be huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
And I would love to be there for
Yeah,
that.
me
but,
too.
One can only hope. At the same time, like, these guys had a great run. They are legends of music, and and if they truly don't like each other, I don't want to see them up on stage together, because that could just maybe, the story kind of has some finality to it right now. And there's beauty in that, I think, especially after such a good run, and really being the band that kind of defined alternative music in the 1980s. That is an achievement in and of itself, and trying to recreate something in the 2010s and maybe we'll be in like the 2020s, and the years of the future, we'll see the Smiths get together as like, sacks of wrinkles up there on stage, going to town playing these old songs. And I don't really necessarily think that that's truly needed, right? It's much more intimate to like look up videos of them playing or
right.
Just listening to their records and albums. So
And of course, Morrissey's had a great solo career. Johnny Marr more recently has put out a couple of solo records, and which have been pretty good. So there's always that to check out as well. But I think it'll always be seen through the filter of what those four guys accomplished in those 4 years,
right, in such a tight time frame. Tom, favorite Smiths album?
Definitely Queen is Dead.
Queen is Dead.
Close second, Meat is Murder. I'd actually put Louder Than Bombs right under there as my third.
Very nice.
Yeah.
For me, obviously, The Queen is Dead. I would then go Meat is Murder, and then their self-titled record. What about you guys out there? What is your favorite Smiths record? Do you disagree with us on our kind of contrary opinion to Strangeways Here We Come? Are you fans of the Smith self-titled record and Meat is Murder, or are you just the Queen is Dead fanboys like we are, fanboys and fan ladies? And also, what's your favorite Smith song? Tom and my favorite songs by the Smiths are Cemetery Gates, and probably always will be. But what about you guys? There's lots to choose from, lots of iconic songs out there. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for additional artist deep dives that we can do in the future at www.velocitiesandmusic.com. Also, email us at velocitiesandmusic@gmail.com. Please take the time to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and make sure you subscribe to the Velocities and Music podcast on your favorite podcasting device. This is the number one way you can help support Velocities and Music, by hitting that subscribe button and allowing us to share with you very quickly whenever we release a new podcast. It's the easiest way for us to communicate. It's also important for you to reach out to us. We love hearing from you. That's what Velocities and Music is all about, and we thank you guys for participating every day. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are Velocities and Music, moving music discussion forward.